Today, we're going to light a fire under why dragons are so popular in literature. See what I did there? Funny, huh? Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Rob. This is my mom, Karen, and this is Books, Banter, and Beyond, the show that we talk about all books, literature, have some fun along the way. So, dragons. They're actually more real than we think. Most histories, especially Asian culture, but even European culture too, has had dragons in their mythology.
Right.
Usually meaning things like rulers from the past, especially in places like Japan and China, where they believe the dragons were actually the rulers of past civilizations. Or in Europe, dragons are usually seen as the antagonist to what the hero must defeat in order to save the kingdom. You have things like movies like Dragonheart. You have Lord of the Rings, which we're going to talk about today as well. But what makes dragons such a popular character all this time is just that. It's the mythology and the literature blended together.
Right.
No other creature I can think of has the ability to really be so prominent as a main character than this creature here, right? It's usually used as a powerful character, sometimes a wise character. A lot of times they can actually speak and give wisdom to the people. And of course, they're usually always fearsome in stature, size, and of course, that really bad ability of being able to burn you to a crisp just by basically sneezing.
Is Godzilla considered a dragon?
No, so he is what Japan calls a kaiju. It's basically their version of a made-up creature. I'm sure you all have seen the various monsters that he's fought. King Kong actually is part of that franchise there, and while he's not a kaiju, he actually is under that realm.
Right.
But it's actually you say that because that one actually is supposed to be based off of a lizard that grew to enormous size via radiation.
Right.
There's actually a lot of historical importance there because that's to do.
Because I think of that. I actually think because we just watched one of those movies the other night, and I remember thinking, God, it like a giant lizard, but it's sort of also like a dragon. It has the same.
Well, it actually, I think there's a reasoning behind there because I think a lot of times, especially in visual media, the person who made it is going to try to give you a visual that you relate to.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it might confuse the hell out of you, you're going to look at it and go, I think I've seen that before. So actually what you said is it makes a lot of sense of what we're talking about today because that's what the theme here is that visual. In terms of thematics in literature, you get a lot of heroism, right? So for instance, in European culture, you have the soldiers, or the knights of the round table who have to go off and battle it. And that's a big theme there. You have the idea of destiny. Usually the person is sent out and the final obstacle is to slay the dragon.
Right.
It's actually become more of a term than an actual doing, where slaying the dragon basically means conquering your fears, right? So dragons have not only become a creature, but they've become a term in English language now. And then, of course, you have the battle between good and evil, which goes back to, obviously, you have the good guys, you have the bad guy. But you do have movies like Dragonheart that I talked about that actually the dragon works with the knight in a way to actually get him more business by pretending to be killed by the knight to get money. And it actually turns the dragon theme on its head. And I think it was Sean Connery and Dennis Quaid who were the characters. Sean Connery played the dragon, which was hilarious. I love thinking about a Scottish dragon,
right?
Because why not?
And
it's Sean Connery, so it can't be bad.
Yeah.
So let's go into some of the examples I found. So the first one here is the Hobbit. Now, the Hobbit itself doesn't follow it specifically, but there is a major character known as Smaug. He is the guy he's controlling over the cave of all the gold, right? And one of the biggest things that Bilbo and his group has to do is basically kill him to get all the goods back. I think generally the reason why this pops up is not so much that it's the dragon per se, but it's the Hobbit. And because we talked about this before with Tolkien, it's a very popular character, a very popular story, But if you want a story that you may not have read, or maybe you've already read it, this is probably the easiest one to read because it's a very short story. It's got the dragon right in the middle of it, but it also highlights the Hobbit's bravery and the fact that these characters are they're not strong characters physically.
Right.
They're able to outsmart this humongous creature and make it out alive, even if it's by the skin of their teeth. And they're like, let's not do that ever again. But hey, put this on our resume that we. Number 2, this is also another Christopher Paolini, Eragon. I don't know if you've heard of this one or not.
Not.
This one basically takes a young farm boy who finds a dragon egg, and he actually bonds with the dragon. So this actually takes it from the opposite side, where the dragon becomes his friend, and he actually has to teach his family and his city that dragons aren't the enemy here. And it's a very hard thing to do, right? Because all this time you grow up, and this kind of goes back to talking about history, where when your family is used to one thing, it's very hard to change their mindset on something that is such a big part of their past, right?
Right.
This individual boy has to basically teach his father and his family that dragons are actually going to help. And its entire series, Eragon is the first of this series, but it's kind of like the boy and his dog, but instead of a dog, he raises a pet dragon.
That's totally normal, I think.
Totally normal, right? And then the final one here is George R.R. Martin's first book from the Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire. And one of the main characters, Daenerys Targaryen, I always mess up her name. She is the dragon whisperer, basically. She's the one that has, a whole clutch of dragons, and basically can use them to her will. So it's kind of the idea of, it's a mixture of both. It's how you can use them as a weapon, but it's also kind of saying, hey, if you bond, if you make friends with nature, and again, we could talk about that too, you can have this compassion between the two. That doesn't mean you have to kill them, but you also have to respect them, right? So it's 3 very different stories, 3 very popular stories that I'm sure people watching have read. But I think if you're going to read a good dragon story, start with these things. Start with these guys here. I think they're very good examples of that.
So how do dragons, as these mythical creatures, enhance the exploration of power dynamics and moral conflicts in fantasy literature? How do they do that?
Okay, so that is a good one. That's pretty deep. So usually in any of these books, whether it's any fantasy, usually have 2 warring sides. You have one castle versus the other. And this actually takes you back to things like Shakespeare, when you have 2 warring families, right?
Right.
And whatever happens in between just makes that warring that much stronger, because one side is like, oh, you looked at me funny. Oh, wait, you ate my food. What are you going to do? The dragon kind of gives, in my opinion, a moral hatred from both sides. As much as both ends might hate each other, they hate the dragon more, usually. So I think in a way the dragon is there to maybe decompress the battle. I don't know. I think the dragon could be, and I'm trying to think of a comparison for real life, but it's the in-between person that it's like, okay, I might hate you and you might hate me, but there's this third thing over here that we both don't like. So for a little while, let's just go deal with that and kind of be friends for a minute.
Right.
And then we can go back to deal with our problems after. That's kind of what I feel like.
Okay, so what significance then do these dragons hold in the literary traditions, and then also in modern fantasy stories? Do they hold different positions? Are they there for different reasons?
I mean, I think generally it's always the same. I think if you want to get a little more creative, you look at the stories where the dragon is on the good side, and that kind of teaches you more about, respecting nature, respecting the animals around you, respecting that. So I think depending on the story you're looking at, you can either look at it as an image that will stop you from warring with each other, or it can be an image of maybe learning more about yourself in a way of how how kindness can shape your viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about wars in a few episodes ago for history. It's the same type of idea. I guess when you have a common interest or even a common enemy per se, you have a better understanding of both sides of the picture, or at least you should have a better understanding.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily, and again, I think we've said this to each other. You don't necessarily have to like your enemy per se, but if you can find a common ground
Right.
to the point where you can deal with them, that's better than anything. And I think that's where the dragon comes in. If you can find that common thing of, okay, I don't have to like you, but if I can just kind of go about my business.
Right. I see. I think we see this not just in stories. We could make an analogy to the dragon being many different things in today's world, in today's
Yeah.
politics, in today's history in the making. I mean, I think the dragon becomes, as I'm listening to you discuss this and describe this, the dragon actually is more representative to this thing, this right, that kind of
Yeah, and I think that's why it's more symbolic, as most creatures are in a book. Obviously they're there physically,
right.
but I think generally the dragon is giving you this image of something to bond over, that you don't have to go at it yourself, I
Right,
guess.
right. I agree. Well, this is the time in the show that we like to put up the famous QR codes. Go visit the store, guys. We have so many different books in there. Rob has so many books in there. It's a used bookstore, which means that the prices are amazing. So you're going to find books on science fiction and dragons and fiction books and what you name it, it's in there. Scan the QR code on the paperbacks and hardbound on your far left. Comic books are in the middle, and of course, you can see merchandise on the far right. And of course, we are wearing our merchandise, just like this. Well, as always, Rob, it's always a pleasure doing these shows. We hope that you enjoy it as well. And if you have a thought or a theme or a book that you want Rob and I to discuss, send it on over. We'd love to hear from you. Go out, give somebody an awesome day. Goodbye, everyone.